Hello, my name is Laura Rich Creek with Laura's Voice, and welcome to Laura Reads Foxed Books. This week in the Misdemeanors of Nancy, Chapter 8, Nancy is innocent, unaware of helping draw the line where friendship ceases. Chapter 8, Where Friendship Ceases. Rollins and Ormsby are not on good terms. The situation is complicated by the fact that the two men are joint owners of a bachelor apartment near Washington Square, and even if they go out to meals and leave their cook to a life of inglorious ease, they are fairly sure to fall over each other in the hall several times a day. The obvious moral of the tale seems to be that no Damon and Pythias should strain the bonds of mutual liking to the point of living together. The Elysian Fields could never live up to their reputation if the blessed were expected to breakfast in company. Still, this Washington Square apartment scheme worked beautifully for months. It would still be running smoothly on pneumatic tires, were it not for Nancy. And though that young woman isn't to blame, she will be held responsible for the trouble. The woman is always held responsible for the trouble. Adam and the man who perpetrated Cherchez la Femme have established precedents infinitely soothing to their sex. Nancy's plea of not guilty would influence no masculine jury. But, in point of fact, the Fates and the Telegraph Company worked Rollins' undoing. There have been many festive dinners at the bachelor apartment. Rollins and Ormsby gave them together, or thought they did. In reality, Watkins, the English butler, gave the dinners. He allowed the other two men to invite the guests, but reserved critical rights even in regard to that detail. The dinners did Watkins credit. Watkins did not feel that the chosen guests invariably reflected credit upon the hosts. As he once remarked to a sympathetic cook, "Young men will be young men, Mrs. Ruggles, and the ladies of the stage I can understand, ma'am. But them literary people." Rollins himself is guilty of poetry in his irresponsible moments, but Watkins overlooks that. "For his father was a gentleman, Mrs. Ruggles, and no matter what goes wrong, blood will tell." It was only a month ago that Miss Reynolds' name drifted into the bachelor apartment conversation. Rollins was responsible for its debut. Many feminine names had dawned and faded upon the apartment horizon, and in Reynolds alone there was nothing portentous. But, taken in conjunction with an unwanted anxiety as to neckties and a forced and unnatural blossoming of sonnets, the name was alarming. Ormsby became interested. Rollins' peculiar uncommunicativeness increased the interest. Miss Reynolds was, apparently, the only bona fide specimen of the real thing in the boroughs of Manhattan and the Bronx, but Rollins' air suggested that she was put away securely in a time-locked safe of which he alone knew the combination. When the respective stars of Rose and Margaret and Ruth and Gladys and their sisters in the ascendant, Rollins had sung the young women's praises early and late, had talked of the loved ones ad nauseum, had taken Ormsby to call so that he too might worship and adore. But until a week before the peace and harmony of the apartment were rent asunder, Ormsby didn't know whether Miss Reynolds had a given name. He had labored for weeks before finding out whether she was blonde or brunette. Her local habitation was a sealed book. To suggestions that she should be included in dinner invitations, Rollins was deaf. Ormsby concluded that the matter was serious and felt flattered by the logical conclusion that Rollins considered him dangerous. He even studied his good-looking face carefully in his mirror and decided that Rollins really wasn't such an ass as one might think. Then, one day, Ormsby's father came to town. Now, Ormsby's father is an institution for which his son and heir entertains a profound respect. The amount of his fortune demands respect. So does his gout. But, as Ormsby Jr. often says, it is the old gentleman's vocabulary as adapted to his gouty hours that commands enthusiastic admiration. It would win humble reverence from a cigar-store Indian. When Ormsby Sr. comes to town, Ormsby Jr. dances to strings attached to the gouty foot. He forsakes everything and cleaves to the governor. In direct proportion to the closeness of his cleaving, so does the size of the check which he will receive at parting grow and increase. Rollins usually protests against the paternal visitations. Having a tailor of his own, he recognizes the exigencies of the situation, but he objects to being deprived of his chum's society. However, when on this particular occasion a dispatch announced to Ormsby that his father would spend the week in New York, Rollins bore up like a hero. He even seemed to take on new cheerfulness. "The old gentleman will get in tomorrow afternoon?" he asked. "Yes," said Ormsby. "Then of course you'll have to dine with him tomorrow evening." "Sure thing." They separated for the day. The next morning, at the breakfast table, Rollins mentioned casually that he expected a young married couple of their acquaintance to dine with him in the evening. "Sorry you can't be here, old chap," he added genially. Ordinarily, Ormsby leaves his office at 4:00, but that afternoon, as luck and the typewriter would have it, he was shockingly delayed. He had promised to join his father at the hotel at 6:00. At 6:45 he rushed home to dress, reflecting gloomily the while that the governor was probably making the air around him violently ultramarine and preparing for the prodigal son a variety of veal that would be swallowed with difficulty. In the hall he met Watkins. There were no signs of prospective festivity in the dining room. "Where's the dinner party?" he asked, as he jammed pearl studs into a dress shirt. "The cook left at noon," said Watkins with the solemn joy of one who announces dire calamity. "The deuce she did! Then the dinner's off?" "Mr. Rollins telegraphed to the guests, sir." "Where's Rollins?" "He's gone to get the young lady who is coming, sir. He's going to take her to dinner and to the theatre." "Young lady? Why, he didn't say— Who was she, Watkins?" "I couldn't say, sir. Mr. Rollins didn't mention the name." Ormsby was struggling with his tie. He dropped the conversation. Also several expressions more forcible than Christian in regard to the man who first invented neckties. The doorbell rang. Watkins disappeared. Ormsby, picking up his overcoat and looking around hopelessly for his opera hat, heard a soft feminine voice saying, "Mr. Rollins lives here?" "Yes, miss," came in Watkins' best company accents. "But he isn't in at present, miss." "Not in?" There was a note of embarrassment and a whole gamut of surprise in the echo. "No, miss. He's gone out to dinner and the theatre." "But you are entertaining at dinner this evening?" The embarrassment had deepened. The surprise had melted into consternation. "I beg pardon, miss, but the cook left, unexpected-like, at noon, and Mr. Rollins had to telegraph the guests not to come." There was a gasp, distinctly audible in Ormsby's room. He drew aside the curtain and stepped into the hall. Watkins obliterated himself. A vision in a soft, shimmering pink gown and hood, and a long cloak of lace and fur stood in the doorway. Her head was held very high. Her cheeks were uncommonly pink. The gray eyes that met Ormsby's were half indignant, half amused. Wholly beautiful. Ormsby didn't know her. He felt convinced at once that not knowing her had been a bit of beastly bad luck. "I have come to dinner," said the vision firmly, but with a lurking dimple threatening to dash into the open. "You didn't get a dispatch from Dick?" She shook her head. The chiffon hood slipped back, disclosing a distracting arrangement of golden fluffiness rippling into gold-brown shadow. "I was invited to dine here at 7, she said. "Your man tells me the cook is gone. Did you, by any chance, save the chaperone?" Ormsby's attention was gliding giddily over the ripples, but he tried to pull himself into coherence. "I suppose the other people got their telegrams. Nobody's here. I don't understand. Dick has gone to— I suppose— He didn't tell— He was stammering joyously and inwardly cursing himself for a blundering fool. This was Dick's break. There was no reason why he should be embarrassed. "I think you must be Mr. Ormsby," said the vision. "My name is Nancy Reynolds." A great light broke upon Ormsby's brain, and an unholy joy took possession of his soul. So this was Rollins' little game. Verily the gods were good. "It is awfully unfortunate," he said feelingly. "There has been some mistake about the telegram. He will be dreadfully cut up." He didn't mention that Rollins was, at that moment, on his way to take the young woman to dinner and to the theatre. Why go into details? I've sent away my cab. Really, you know, it is all rather provoking." The vision was evidently irritated. As evidently, her sense of humor was wrestling with her wrath. Moreover, if gray eyes are to be believed, she did not consider it necessary to visit her anger upon the innocent friend of the guilty Rollins. Ormsby looked at the eyes, and threw his chum overboard without a shadow of compunction. After all, Rollins hadn't played fair. "I will telephone for a cab, but you mustn't stand here in the hall. Won't you come in and wait?" She hesitated, then followed him down the narrow hall to the drawing-room. "Perhaps the imposing person who opened the door for me can chaperone us," she said with a touch of embarrassment. "I'm afraid it is all distinctly unconventional. Bachelor apartments and a strange young man and no chaperone within 70 blocks. Will you please tell the cabman to hurry?" Ormsby obeyed orders. It comforted his soul to realize that New York cabmen are impervious to such orders. After telephoning, he sat down across the room from Nancy and gave himself up to the joy of it. For the first time he realized just why he and Rollins had put silvery green paper on the wall. It was in order that a slender figure in rosy pink and a crown of red gold hair might glow and flame against a green background. Incidentally, he reflected that he had been altogether wrong when he guyed Rollins about buying that impossible old oak chair. Of course it did look more or less like a stage throne, but when there is a chance of entertaining a queen— Only he wished she wouldn't stroke that carved griffin on the chair arm, and that other grinning beast wouldn't lay his head against her soft white shoulder. Some way or other it seemed so damned impertinent and familiar. There is the making of a first-rate Turk in Ormsby. He didn't mention his feeling about the griffins. On the contrary, he talked of shoes and ships and sealing-wax with laudable gravity. Ormsby is a gentleman, if his tendencies are Turkish. Still, in his heart, he was glad that he had had the forethought to telephone to 63rd Street for a cab, instead of ordering one around the corner. A young woman couldn't be expected to know anything about the telephone numbers of cab stables, even when she heard them called. Occasionally, a mental picture of a gouty old gentleman in a hotel room arose and smote the old gentleman's son with horror, but the awesome vision died away in a glow of rose, pink, and red gold. One's readiness to pay the piper depends upon the quality of the dance. "It's a terrible grind on Dick," said Dick's chum with fine relish. Nancy looked pathetic. When Nancy drifts into gentle pathos, men who know her will reach for life-preservers. But Ormsby did not know her. "My sympathy is all for myself," she said. "Of course this is all very charming," she added with a glance that neutralized the chill into which her first remark had cast Ormsby, and raised his temperature to fever heat. But it really is embarrassing, and—" She blushed. Bobby always says that the blush is more fatal than the pathos. She looked at Ormsby doubtfully. Then, with a little outburst of friendly confidence, leaned toward him. "It's worse than embarrassing," she said. "It's tragic. My mother has gone out for dinner, and she told both maids they might go and stay until 9 o'clock. Ormsby arose to the occasion. He believed he had evolved a glittering idea without assistance. Bobby would have known better. Ormsby's guardian angel clutched at his shoulder, but Ormsby shook him off. A gout-inspired torrent of paternal opinion clamored in his ears, but could not daunt him. "I wish—" he began, then paused to take breath, and went on with a rush. "I wish you would let me take you to dinner. I haven't had mine, and I'd have to dine alone." Shade of the waiting governor. "It's such forlorn work, dining alone. I'd be so awfully pleased if you would go with me." It was out. He looked at her apprehensively. The pink gown and hood and the stunning fur cloak that had slipped from her shoulders all seemed appallingly Philistine and conventional. Nancy was surprised. Anyone could have seen that. She was also shocked. Not discouragingly shocked, however. The shading was masterly. She looked at him with her pretty head a trifle tipped to one side. Evidently tradition and inclination were struggling within her. If Ormsby could have remembered a prayer, he would have said it. He did start in on one, but he didn't know the rest of it, and, anyway, it didn't seem to fit the case. "I'm afraid," said the vision doubtfully. Nancy's manner is always most doubtful when her decision is most firmly made. "I'm afraid it would be very improper." If only a fear, not a conviction, barred the way, Ormsby was ready to fight for his heart's desire. "Oh, no, he began hotly, but Nancy interrupted him. "It isn't at all the thing to dine without a chaperone at a restaurant. Someone I know would surely be there. And these things," she glanced down at the pink gown and the gorgeous cloak, "are rather conspicuous." While there was hesitancy, there was hope. Ormsby plunged into the breach. "But I know a very, very quiet little place near here. You'd never meet any of your friends there. It's ghastly respectable, and nobody there would notice anything one wore." The last two statements did not tally. The soul of respectability is criticism. But the vision apparently didn't notice the flaw in the argument. "If you are quite sure," she began. "Positive," swore Ormsby, and his guardian angel spread his wings and fled, weeping. As the young couple were leaving the apartment, the telephone bell rang furiously. Ormsby went back to the drawing-room, closing the door into the hall carefully behind him. Intuition is a wonderful and valuable thing. When he took up the receiver, a grin spread across his countenance and bade fair to meet at the back of his head. "Oh, that you, Dick?" he said in honeyed tones, carefully lowered. "What? Oh, yes. She came down here. Didn't get your telegram. Yes, it was awkward, wasn't it? I understand how you feel. Yes, I was at home. Lucky, wasn't it? Merest accident. You thought there might have been some mistake about the telegram? Chance she might have come here? So clever of you, dear boy. If I had your brain, Rollins, I wouldn't write poetry with it. Offended? Oh, not seriously. She's still here. No, not waiting for you. Well, don't kill a horse, dear boy. She and I are just going out to dinner. Fie, fie, Richard. Such language. So long, old man." He rang off. "A business matter," he explained to the vision when he joined her. They started once more. Again the telephone rang viciously. "That," said Ormsby with an air of conviction, "is the governor." "Aren't you going back?" asked Nancy. "No, Watkins can attend to it," said Ormsby calmly. He breathed an inward prayer that the old gentleman might not convict him of murder by expiring in a fit of apoplectic rage, and hurried the vision down to the 63rd Street cab. Later, he paid the piper. The governor left no check. Rollins does not speak, but Ormsby swears that the dance was well worth the price. End of Chapter 8, Where Friendship Ceases. We had a different perspective and an interesting outcome here. What do you think of Nancy's role? And about Ormsby's choices? Of course, we have the advantage of third-person narrative, but I hope, Nancy's instincts would soon lead her away from a guy like Ormsby. This has been The Misdemeanors of Nancy by Eleanor Hoyt, illustrated by Penryn Stanlaws. Original copyright 1902. This work is in the public domain. Production copyright 2025 by Laura E. Richcreek. Thanks for listening. See you in the next video.